Emily, Josh, and I are excited to share our data science presentation on the Not So Diverse Editions. In January of 2020, Barnes & Noble, one of the nation's largest book retailers, in partnership with Penguin Random House, developed a campaign called Diverse Editions. The release of these classics comprised of the same classic storylines, but this time with cover art showing racially diverse characters. Essentially, Barnes & Noble planned to recreate book covers with illustrations of Black versions of white main characters. Twitter, in response to this slated release, exploded. When the preview of the campaign was released via social media, outrage spread throughout the literary community. Many Black authors and supporters took to social media, posting comments using the hashtag #LiteraryBlackface. Twitter users highlighted in their tweets the fact that the texts selected for the Diverse Editions campaign were written by white authors from Eurocentric backgrounds, and that this move to deploy such cover titles just before Black History Month was a calculated attempt to increase revenue without increasing representation of African American authors. This movement was picked up by news outlets such as National Public Radio. As a result of the social media backlash and negative press via online publications, Barnes & Noble decided to cancel its plans for the Diverse Editions campaign prior to the official release. Our goal as a team was to use data science to analyze the backlash from the campaign using Twitter data. We further wanted to analyze the topics of the canonized text in contrast to those of the same age written by Black authors by leveraging Project Gutenberg and sentiment analysis. Our first investigation required us to understand the type of responses expressed on Twitter. We wanted to understand through data how the Twitterverse was thinking and discussing their perspectives regarding the Diverse Editions campaign. Josh will walk you through our process of collecting, working with, and then analyzing our findings from Twitter.
Leveraging our Twitter API authorization, we collected and cleaned the initial CSV file generated from the Twitter search. After we tokenized and term matrixed the 1,000 tweets and 16 variables into colored word clouds. The word clouds, while visually pleasing and effective in displaying data, it did not enhance our capacity to distill a deeper meaning of the matrix Twitter data. However, applying the a priori algorithm, we could find associations by computing the support, confidence, and lift. Through association rule mining, we could identify the way in which words relate to one another given a support interval. The words on this slide appeared most often together when searching for hashtags such as literary blackface, Black History Month, even the Barnes & Noble's Twitter handle being Buzz. By tokenizing the tweets from the API web scraping, we were able to organize and then analyze the directionality and interrelatedness of these commonly tweeted words. When analyzing the relationships, we began to notice how many individuals express discontent because they have been dealing with these issues of blackface for years, thus expressing the wish to erase blackface from our society. This information began to confirm what we were casually identifying through tweet scrolling, as Lakita indicated on an earlier slide. This visual expressed a similar acquisition pattern as the last slide. However, this data visualization was sorted by focusing on the confidence interval instead of the support interval from the previous. Using the confidence interval revealed a different narrative in the data set, as words like complexities, a common word used to discuss literature, as well as concepts like intertwined and sisterhood, both of which would discuss identities in a given cultural group. Finally, the trajectory of exploring is critical to identify as individuals on Twitter continue to attempt to sense-make identities of marginalized cultures who would not be allowed into exclusive groups, such as canonized literature. This propelled us to investigate the texts of the Diverse Editions campaign and to contrast the sentiments of these texts with those published by African American authors.
Once we understood the reaction on Twitter, particularly the animosity and frustration that was generated in response to the Diverse Editions campaign, we decided that to fully understand the type of issue we were identifying, we should compare the Diverse Editions text to those actually written by African American authors. Josh and Emily will walk you through our process of collecting, working with, and then analyzing our findings from this section of the project.
As we devised our system for analyzing the literature of the Diverse Editions campaign, our group began to identify something essential for our analysis. Rather than simply respond to the cover art of the Diverse Editions, we needed to dig deeper and see if the texts selected for this campaign actually represented the voices of African American literary culture. Remember, these texts were slated to be featured for a soft launch at the start of Black History Month, heightening the backlash on Twitter. Thus, it was imperative that we take time to actually analyze the diction or word choice, perspectives, and sentiment within these texts compared to those actually written by African American authors. Also, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that some of the titles and words that were generated in our study are controversial, or at least a potential trigger for individuals. But we felt the only way to clarify the value of this analysis was to be transparent with our results. These are the texts that were selected by Barnes & Noble for the Diverse Editions campaign. On this slide, you can see the title, author name, their ethnicity, and then the Project Gutenberg ID. We will talk about this ID in a moment. These are the texts that we selected to represent the African American authors and were also available on Project Gutenberg. Many of the authors listed are canonized in American literature, but some names and titles are less renowned.
Our first goal when working with these texts was to web scrape and then cluster each set of titles into two vectors: the Diverse Editions text set and the text by African American authors. We then organized the text clusters based on the individual words in this data set using a tokenizer. To arrive at word frequencies which were actualized in word cloud visualization, the word cloud you are currently seeing is the result of this process with the text by African American authors. Once we were able to view this word cloud, we realized that this data visualization, while helpful, did not accomplish our goal of understanding the varying perspectives of our text clusters. So we explored more possibilities for our code and arrived at sentiment analysis coding, which we will now discuss. Once we realized how different the top words were from the two clusters of text, we decided that we needed a more rich analysis of the data sets. So we investigated the sentiment analysis process. This required us to pair each word in the data sets with a binary sentiment of positive or negative, which was accessed through the Bing library. The overall goal for data visualization is realized on this slide. As you can see, the positive-negative association has more power than the word cloud you noticed on the last slide. We were able, through this analysis tool, to really begin to understand the differences in perspectives and sentiment that were alluded to on Twitter.
Before contrasting the two text cluster word clouds that are coupled with sentiment analysis coding, we wanted to take a moment to acknowledge a limitation of our Bing library. If you notice the two top words of the sentiment analysis for texts written by African American authors, you will see a discrepancy that we were shocked to find. The top negative word used most frequently is slave, which is not a surprise considering the age and cultural history of the text set. However, if you look at the top word in the positive category, you will see the word master. While master has a positive connotation when discussing accomplishments, we had a feeling that this was not the connotation of master in the text selected. We returned to the literature to confirm our suspicion, which was found to be true. Master was used as a way to talk about a slaveholder and not the sense of accomplishment felt after mastering a task or goal. We considered removing this word from the data set. However, we wanted to highlight the fact that this is another example of how Eurocentric perspectives can dominate the language of a literary culture. This shows how even in code, which we often assume to be impartial, can expose internal biases or bias from lived experience, and how the writer of the code can unintentionally affect the application and damage the results of projects such as this one. These two word clouds indicate the most frequent words in each text cluster. Words in red express negative sentiment, and words in blue express positive sentiment. The larger the word, the higher the frequency of use by authors in their respective text clusters. When considering the positive sentiments, both text clusters contain the ideas of love and beauty. However, the key differences in word choice and sentiment begin to expose the divergence of perspectives between the two text clusters. The diverse editions texts use words like rich, honor, gold, and heaven, indicating a sense of reward for efforts made by characters within the plot lines of the text narratives. Yet in the texts written by African American authors, there are more words to indicate ideas of gaining intangible sociocultural securities, such as freedom, respect, trust, comfort, and safety. Some commonalities we notice in the negative cluster include words like poor, miss, death, fear, and doubt. The first obvious difference, and one that is culturally relevant to our topic, is the frequent use of the word or a variation of the word slave in the texts by African American authors. When continuing to contrast the two sets, we also began to notice the type of power dynamic present in negative words. The Diverse Editions campaign, of which most texts were written by white authors, used negative words with aggressive connotations such as spite and variations on the word kill. When observing the sentiment of the texts by African American authors, there is more of a connotation of hopelessness and a lack of power, captured in words such as cry, anxious, loss, grief, sick, and worse. These findings validate the backlash on Twitter regarding the Diverse Editions campaign, as there are clear differences in sentiment and perspectives in the two text clusters. Ultimately, if African American culture is going to be represented in publications at Barnes & Noble, this representation cannot be done by altering the covers of texts written by white authors. To represent African American culture, texts written by African American authors must be published and represented by the publication industry.
Like good researchers, we followed the trail that the data provided for us and discovered that this was not just a Barnes & Noble or Penguin Random House issue exclusively. The failed Diverse Editions campaign was only symptomatic of the root cause. Currently, the publishing industry is not inclusive and lacks diversity. Data from the 2019 Diversity Baseline Demographics Survey regarding the publishing industry unearths a problem that is larger in scale. This visual is a graphic representation of the disparity between the share of the publishing market for white authors in comparison to all other ethnic groups, and this trend has sustained for the past 5 years according to the data. So where do we go from here? The publishing and literary retail industry must move beyond conversations and campaigns regarding diversity. A shift in culture and a concerted effort to ensure that more books are written and published by authors who are otherwise marginalized must become an industry priority. If retailers and the publishing houses wish to truly celebrate diversity, they should seek out the plethora of exemplary novels about the experiences of various ethnic groups written by authors who represent these groups. And finally, online brick and mortar retailers must cease the practice of segregating books with non-white characters into ethnic sections versus integrating them into the appropriate genre. There are literary voices hidden in the ethnic section of bookstores that the world needs to hear. Thank you for listening.